All right, good evening, Forest Park. I am here with two Forest Park royalty members. Here with Mayor Chuck Johnson and Councilor Denise Jernigan-Holt. Thank you so much for meeting with me this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Something that I found out about maybe the end of last month. Our two Forest Park family members, they were very active in the civil rights movements in the 60s. And we're going to discuss a little bit of it this evening. So if y'all are ready, we'll go ahead and get started.
Fine.
And y'all know I'm not a formal person, so we're going to have some fun. First, Ms. Denise, tell me about yourself. Where are you from originally?
Well, I was born in a very, very small town in Alabama, Camden, Alabama.
Okay.
Population probably 500, 600, whatever, very small.
Okay.
We later moved to Selma. And I personally later moved to upstate New York, came back to Selma, and finished out my high school education there. I was born number 13 in a family of 15.
Wow.
9 girls, 6
Okay.
boys.
Okay.
Yes. So I'm one of the young ones.
Okay.
I have a bachelor's degree.
All right.
I have been on council for about 13 years.
Okay.
And now I serve as the first
Vice.
vice mayor.
All right.
I've lived in Forest Park, I guess, on and off about 35 years.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, we're blessed to have you here. Mr. Chuck.
Well, I too am a Southerner by
Okay.
birth. I was born and raised in Tennessee, actually. Went to obviously grade school, high school there. Went to an HBCU in Jackson, Tennessee. Graduated from there, and believe it or not, I was a teacher for 12 years. And I did not teach in Tennessee. I taught in suburban St. Louis, in a city that unfortunately made the news for an incident in Ferguson, Missouri. Excuse me. I taught for 12 years, and then I went to work as a labor relations consultant, first in Kentucky for the Kentucky Education Association for 4 or 5 years, and then came to Ohio, where I spent 28 years as a consultant for the Ohio Education Association, basically representing teachers in terms of negotiating their contracts, doing their grievances, representing them before the various labor commissions, redressing their grievances. I moved to Forest Park probably maybe 82. I am now in my finishing up my 20th year on council, and I've been mayor
Wow.
since 2007.
That is excellent.
Yeah.
And we're definitely blessed to have you here. I, as a member of the fire department, I love all of our council members, but especially these two. You have so much knowledge and wisdom to give us, and I appreciate all the side talks that we have, like on the record and off the record. All right, so back in the 60s, nowadays we've compared what's been going on now with social injustice and civil rights protests. We've compared them to what was going on in the 60s. What was the climate like back then?
I don't think the climate where I'm from back then does not compare to what's going on now. You knew there was racism. Mm-hmm. It was a known fact, so you didn't have to wonder, about a person being a racist. Mm-hmm. You knew they were racist. Mm-hmm. You kind of like knew where you stood, mm-hmm. per se. I mean, now they could be your next door neighbor and you don't know it. So, I mean, there's a big difference.
With the events that occurred last year, 2020, and there were many protests all across the globe, really. Many, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but many have stated that things are just as bad now as they were in the 60s. So I wanted to get you guys' opinion on that.
Things, like I said, things were bad then. But, you know, the difference between the protests that I was involved in, the violence, there was not that kind of violence.
Okay.
You know, with us marching, we were always peaceful. There were no burning of buildings.
Okay.
There was no breaking in the Capitol. None of that. Not burning up your own neighborhood. We didn't do any of that.
So the protesting entities didn't tear up their own neighborhoods, or they were. Mr. Mayor, we talked.
I think she's right. I think that one of the differences, and a very important difference, is how the protests then were organized and orchestrated. As Councilwoman Vice Mayor Holt had said earlier off camera, there were constant meetings, mostly in churches,
Yes.
telling people when, where, how, and who. So even before we got out onto the street, before people got out on the street to protest, you know, we knew where everybody was going to meet. We knew what time people were going to meet. We knew exactly where we were going to go to in terms of the route. We knew what was going to happen once we got to that point. And when that was over, we knew, you know, everybody was going to disperse and go back. And as she said, the violence then would have been those people who were perpetrating violence against the protesters, not the other way around. I think one of the things people need to remember here is those protests, by and large, now that's not to say that there weren't some offshoots somewhere where people were doing differently, but it was geared to be peaceful, nonviolent. We were protesting against segregation and for the right to exercise our rights to vote. Those were the two primary goals. We didn't waver from that. We stuck with it. And that, to me, that's the basic difference. It was so well organized.
And we had Dr. King that always preached nonviolence. It was always nonviolence on our part. And like he said, you know, the violence didn't come from us, the protesters. It came against us.
Yeah, that was something that I noticed. My son, he's 25 years old. He led one of the peaceful protests down in Cincinnati. And one of the things that he found out, that there were so many different factions that were also trying to protest on that same day, that he didn't use chaos to describe it, but more or less he said it was kind of chaotic.
Disorganized.
Very disorganized because everybody wanted to protest police brutality, but everybody had sort of a similar way that they wanted to do it, but like you mentioned, they weren't all peaceful.
They had their own agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were definitely agendas involved.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
Well, and also I think too, when I look back on those times, you know, that's not to say that I or she was involved in all those, but I think the thing was, we had, as I said before, we had a very specific central agenda. We didn't waver from that agenda. We stuck with that agenda. The other thing is, and this is not to necessarily knock the media, but you didn't have the media out looking to make news. They reported the news. You didn't have the media going to just trying to grab somebody out of the line to interview. There were people who were our spokespersons. Those were the people who talked. So if somebody had come to you or to me and said, can I get a quote, or what do you think about this? We would just point to the person you need to go talk to. So that too made it much easier for us to all be on the same page. we weren't looking for our 15 seconds in front of the camera.
How about within the communities? Did you have a lot of support there from other African Americans?
We did because people came from, because living in Selma, you got a little town here, because I actually lived in Selmont, which was east of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So I didn't live on the other side of the bridge. So you had the people from that side of the bridge, from my side of the bridge, and you had people that came in from surrounding areas that participated in the protests.
Okay.
And we always met at Brown Chapel AME Church, and that's where Dr. King, John Lewis, and, that's where we met.
Well, like anything else, it was not, we didn't have 100% support. There were some people who thought we were moving too fast. There were other people who thought we were moving too slow. There were people who worried about retaliation. Some did, some didn't. I think, as she said, the thing was, though, in most churches, not all churches, you could count on there being leadership in that particular church. Now, for me, like, especially when I was in college, coming back home on vacations or during the summers, we'd go to the church, we would hear what's going on, and we'd go out, we'd do those things that we needed to do. But we knew that inside the church, at the church where people were gonna meet, they were being led, they were being told, and the same message that was being given in my church in Tennessee was probably very close to the same message that was being given in her church, in their meetings in Selma.
See, we were predominantly students that did all of the marching, getting thrown in jail for weeks at a time. We were mostly students. And to say, was there a lot of support? My sister and I decided one day, okay, we're gonna go to the classroom and we're gonna tell everybody we're gonna march, we're gonna march. So we go, everybody's coming down the hallway. Then all of a sudden the principal comes out and he sees us like, what's going on? We're gonna go march, we're going to go protest. And he said, if you don't go back to your classroom, everybody's gonna be expelled. So that afternoon, he went downtown Selma, just being there. He got hit on the head with the billy club. So the next day he said, everybody that wants to go march, you can go march. He had to feel it before he would,
Yeah, that's a similarity that I see today, where people, unless they're directly affected, they feel that either it doesn't exist or that it's diminished, and it's not as bad as the media or as bad as the protesters make it out to be. Vice Mayor Holt, you participated in the March on Selma, Bloody Sunday.
Yes.
What was the climate like?
Let me tell you, to get up to Bloody Sunday,
Okay.
we were planning to march on one Sunday. So we went and they stopped us. So at that point, Dr. King knelt, prayed. We turned around and went back to the church. The second time we went, that's when all hell broke loose.
Okay.
That was Bloody Sunday. When we got on the other side of that bridge, there were, I guess, state troopers, their posse, whoever they had, they were on horses and standing there with billy clubs. And as we crossed that bridge, they opened fire with tear gas. I think I got a direct hit of the tear gas. So now you're blinded, and we're right there on the river. And so we're running all over the place, and I was with my sister. So now my sister, I don't know where she is. I'm afraid because I don't know what has happened to her. And that's when John Lewis got beat, and they were using the cow prods, to, those shockers to shock. But they mostly did that to the guys, to the men. the ladies basically, or the students, the female students basically just got trampled. Running, somebody, if you fell down, somebody would drag you to pick you up, and we were all together, supporting each other. So it was no cakewalk. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible.
Yeah, I could not imagine. I could not imagine.
But again, that's as she stated before. That's just an example, though. I think people need to try to imagine what it would have been like. Even I can't imagine what that would have been like. But imagine going into a situation knowing that there's going to be this kind of violence rained upon you. When I think back, I think about the dedication that had to have been present to day after day after day, you go out and you march, knowing that all of these bad things are going to happen to you, not just in terms of, not just marching, but whether you were doing the marching or whether you were doing the sit-ins or even like the Freedom Riders. All these people knew from the beginning that they were going to be the receivers of brutality and some kind of violence, whether that violence wasn't obviously always physical. There was verbal abuse. To me, it's hard to imagine that that kind of, how do you gird yourself up and get ready for that? And you just, but you know that the reason that you're out there, they had to know that the reason that they were out there was that important. It was something that it's worth it. Not necessarily worth it for yourselves, but you looked at, I'm sure you think about the generations coming after you. It's a little bit almost like, not almost like, it's like most parents. We all want things to be better for our kids than they were for us. So we have to make those sacrifices. You're willing to make those sacrifices. But it took a lot of tenacity to go through that kind of thing. I marvel at the sacrifices that were made for all of us.
I don't think I was thinking about making things better for my kids or anything at that time. I was making it better for my parents.
Yeah.
I wanted my parents to be able to go and vote. I wanted them to be, that was their right. I wanted to make sure that they could vote. And before we even went to the march or to the bridge and stuff like that, when we marched around the streets in Selma, the sit-ins and things like that, they would take us. They took us this one day, loaded us on buses. Our parents don't have a clue where we are. They took us to a prison camp outside of Selma. We stayed in that prison camp for 7 days. They put all the girls in one room, which was about 200, it was a big room, 200 rooms. We stayed on that concrete floor for 7 days in March.
The amount of dedication and discipline involved to withstand that type of violence, like you said, Mr. Mayor, like knowing that you're going into it. And you guys, you made a vow to be nonviolent, not to fight back. I was reading articles where Dr. King, he on his march on Selma, which was a couple months before maybe.
The first one where we went and he prayed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he said that the police attacked, and a person that was videoing was supposed to have been documenting. He put his camera down and helped the protesters, tried to help get the police off the protesters, and he reprimanded the photographer. He said, nobody knows this is happening if you're not recording it. He's like, do your job, we'll do ours, we understand what's happening. And I couldn't imagine. It's a different mindset. And that's not to say that we don't have nonviolent groups that are protesting now. By and large, I would say most of the protesters are nonviolent, but you do have people out there, and that does cause to the disorganization of the units. my son's protest, I saw it firsthand. 95% nonviolent, marched around downtown. They had contacted the city expected them to be there. They had U.S. Marshals walking with them just to make sure that they stayed out of trouble and nothing happened to them. There was a group in the back that, for whatever reason, wanted to confront the police.
And I think this goes back to what she was saying before about the differing agendas.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you 100%. The vast majority of people who are out protesting are doing what exactly they know what they're there for, and they're doing what they need to be doing. Unfortunately, you do have that small group of people, and in a lot of cases, they have absolutely no connect with the protest.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is just a time for them to get out there and be seen and be heard. And again, unfortunately, bad things sell when it comes to news, not good things. It's far more profitable, to use that term, to have stories about that 3% who are tearing things up, burning things, fighting with the police, than that 97% who marched down and heard the speeches, did what they needed to do, and went back home.
Yes.
So that's what, to me, that's a very definite distinction between then and now. Going back to what was something you asked before about what was the climate like, I think I would be remiss if I did not say that in the protest, in the civil rights movement, there were not just black ministers. There were rabbis. There were a lot of white clergy. There were a lot of white people who participated along with the protesters.
Yes.
in those efforts, just as there were a number of white attorneys working with the NAACP. So, oftentimes when I'm asked questions about racism and things like that, I think you have to look at it. I think you alluded to it. You have to look at the individual. If it walks like a duck, it's probably going to be one. But the key is to know the difference between the duck and the goose. And that's very important, because it's wrong to say all of anything is bad.
Right.
All of these people are this, that, or the other. I think we're very quick to stick labels on. But, people from other groups, people from other religions, made very significant contributions to the civil rights movement, and we should never forget that.
Absolutely.
Right, because you remember Viola Luso from Detroit, didn't have a dog in that fight at all. Left her husband and kids in Detroit. What happens?
Yeah.
She loses her life by us, helping us, a white lady. So like you said, no mistake. Everybody that don't look like me is not prejudiced. I know that.
Absolutely.
I get that, yes.
And I guess also, Jermaine, there is a tendency to think that the conditions that existed in the South only existed in the South. That's probably one of the furthest things from the truth. There was segregation in the North. I recall a conversation that you and I had where you were talking about your dad telling you about
Sundown towns.
Yeah.
Yeah,
See,
sundown neighborhoods.
Those things existed. The difference being there, as she said, you knew it. They were out front with it, so you knew. In other places, while you may not have seen white-only signs or go to the back, people, the attitude existed. And it's just like today. The attitudes today still exist in some quarters. It's just a matter of identifying them and dealing with them. People aren't now, nobody wants to be personally labeled as being racist. I shouldn't say nobody, but most people don't want to be. Well, and racists come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, but nobody wants to be labeled that. Then people in the South, that was fine. People in the northern part of the country, the same thing existed. Nobody just never owned up to it.
Because when I got here, I mean, I came to Cincinnati in '68, and I had to go to a dentist downtown. I was shocked when I was taken into another room and couldn't wait in the waiting room with
The rest of the people.
the rest of the people.
Wow.
Now, if I was in Alabama, you automatically know, like for blacks only, white only. I mean, there they didn't have it up on the wall saying that, but it was being done.
And I will say this, and this is I will do a disclaimer up front. This is just an opinion, but I would dare say that now, in today's world, in this country, racial conditions are far, far better in the South than they are elsewhere in this country. Because those people, all of them, both sides, have learned that they're better off living together than they are being separate and apart.
And I totally agree with that. I think the South now is much better because the few that you got to know it. Here,
You don't know, it's subtle.
yes,
Housing discrimination, education discrimination.
yes,
These subtle systems are put in place. And it's like the man behind the curtain is controlling it.
systemic racism.
Systemic.
Yes,
I mean, and you hear about it informally, like my friends that I talk to, tons of them moved to Georgia, they'll move to Alabama because, they feel like they can go and start a business there and they'll get more support than they will in the northern states.
yes.
Yeah,
That's why they're booming because
right, and
Georgia,
all
Alabama,
all
Carolina.
levels of society in the South, you're going to see, whether you go into banks, hospitals, governmental buildings, private industries, you're going to see far more minorities, not just blacks even, that in high level positions than you ever would here.
What advice would you give the modern day activists today?
Tough one. I should let you go first.
Get an agenda.
Okay.
Don't just haphazardly decide you want to go out there and do something. Make a plan. Make it clear. And follow through.
Excellent. I can't add very much to that. I would say I would only say to add to that is, in doing all those things, do it because you feel it's the right thing to do, not because of what you think you might gain coming out from the other end. You can't go into this thing thinking, okay, if I do this, then I'm going to be recognized as a great leader, or I'm going to be recognized for what I did. If nobody recognizes you, or because you were out there, if you can go and look in the mirror and say, I did the right thing, then you've been successful.
And it can't be I.
No,
It's us.
Us,
Exactly.
We
we,
have to do it together.
us and we.
We're put here to serve.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're here to serve. What do we need to do as a society to make things better?
I think it's a tall order to look at things and say, how do you make this better? How do you make that better? But I think in a way it comes back to the same question that we just asked and answered. You make things better by doing, not by saying. And in the doing part, you have to be dedicated to it. See, there's no way that you can. See, I don't believe that racism is taught. I think it's a learned thing. I think people. Let me rephrase that. I don't think you're born with it. I think you become that based on what you see, what you hear, and what you're taught. I flubbed up there, but I think in order to make things better, everybody has to basically do one simple thing, and it sounds so simple, and I know, but it all goes back to that: do unto others. And as long as you can do that, and again, go look in the mirror and say, I try to treat everybody exactly the way I want to be treated. If you do that, that's how you make things better. You can put a million laws on the book about a million different things, but if nobody follows them, it's a waste. And one analogy that I like to use, Jermaine, and I know unfortunately in your job you see far too much of it. Almost after every mass shooting incident, first thing we hear is we need more gun laws. We need more gun laws. There are enough laws already. It's following those laws and doing what needs to be done with them, enforcing them is what makes it work. And the same thing with this. We can say we're going to make the justice system more equitable, but the justice system is not going to be any better than the people who are administering it. You know, if you still have the same people and same type people in the same positions, all you've done is given them 3 or 4 dozen more laws that say this is what you ought to be doing. But if they're still doing what they was doing in the past, it doesn't happen. Do unto others.
If people just understand that, because I don't look like you, you don't look like me, that you're better than I am. But it has to start at the home. Like you said, you're not born a racist, even though sometimes I question that. You're not born a racist, but you're taught. It's kids act like their parents. They do what their parents do or their grandparents. You know, you're going to school every day. There's no one class that has all the same race in that class. Accept it. Get along.
Absolutely. Embrace it, celebrate it.
Yes. I'm not here to take anything from you. All I want is what's due me. I want equal treatment. That's all I want. I'm not trying to get anything from you. I'm not trying to take anything from you. Yes. I was born here in the U.S., so were you. What makes you better than me? I don't want what you have. You definitely don't want what I have. But I want to be on the same equal playing field.
Yeah, I want the ability to be able to get it.
Right.
Yes.
The same way. I don't want anybody giving it to me, but just don't hinder me from getting it for any reason.
Yeah, make it equitable for everybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
And again, like as I said, that's a lot easier said than done.
Yes.
Because we have, there are all of these things out there this is the way it was for years. It's hard for people to let go of some things, but you have to let go of those negatives, no matter whether they're racial or sexual or whatever. You got to let go of those negative things and realize that, hey, treating people right. I think maybe church people would say I'm wrong here. There's nothing to say you got to love everybody, but you ought to treat everybody right. And to me, they're not necessarily the same thing. It's a little bit like I don't have to like who I work for, but I expect that I have to do what that person wants. What I'm being paid to do, whether I like them or not. And I see this the same way.
Yeah, that's it. You should love everybody. I believe that.
Yeah, but
But you don't have to like.
Yes.
Thank you, right? Thank you. Yeah. So, church-wise, you're supposed to love everybody, but and anybody who says they like everybody is just lying to you.
Exactly. Yeah.
One of the biggest issues I see, and I know that in the 60s, you had your peaceful movement, you had your Martin Luther King, your John Lewis's, but you also had your Malcolm X, where it's like, slap me, I'm gonna slap you back, by any means necessary. Society now, it just seems, is so extreme. And the different factions, they don't want to give anybody the benefit of the doubt. It's like we're always assuming the worst about a group or an individual that's not like me, or, something happens, they're automatically a racist, or, you're automatically pulling a race card per se. And that's not it. We need to recognize our differences and not be tolerant as in ignore things, but, discuss it. Be open to discuss it. Be open to, go into it with an open mind.
Right.
And, and understand that you may not have all the answers. Everybody is made up of their experiences, what their parents taught them, where they grew up, how they grew up, if they had money or not, if they did go to church or not. That spiritual, holistic upbringing. Everybody's different.
Yes.
So we have to learn to accept that, and like you said, like move forward. Don't necessarily forget the past. You don't want to repeat the bad things that happened, but you have to move forward.
Right.
Oh,
You
yeah.
have to move forward.
Not only do you have to move forward, but you have to put yourself in a situation where you think, okay, the only person that I really have complete control over, and I don't know about complete, is myself. If I do what I'm supposed to do, and if everybody else does what he or she is supposed to do, things will be better. But you can't solve any problem if you don't recognize that there is a problem. But in recognizing that problem, going back to what you just said, see, I can't point to you and say, here are Jermaine's faults, period. And when we're gonna sit down and talk about your fault without being willing to say, oh, and by the way, I have some too. Mm-hmm. And I need to deal with those, and we need to deal with those. We can't deal with just the faults or the of one side or one group. They all have to be dealt with. But it comes from a willingness to sit down and recognize that there's a problem and talking about it and trying to find step-by-step solutions. This thing has been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's not going to go away in 2 or 3 weeks, but it's not going to go away at all if we don't start to working on it from the standpoint that you say, instead of looking to jump on this person or this group because of what you think, you have to be willing to say, okay, I don't necessarily think that way, but convince me or at least explain to me why you see it that way. Mm-hmm. Get an understanding.
People need to realize, the rowdy people that are out there, they need to realize where they came from or where we came from. Understand that. Mm-hmm. And then you will understand that some of the stuff that you do, you shouldn't do it. It's not necessary. It's not necessary to do all of this to get what you want. The burning, the shooting, the killing, the riots, and it's just
because I think you, again, looking back, I think the one reason that the civil rights movement, the early movement, was so successful is because people did that. People recognize that if we go out there and we do what we're supposed to be doing, then other people are going to be sympathetic to us for doing it that way. Mm-hmm. However, on the other hand, if you go out there and you're being destructive, as you were just saying, then I don't know how much sympathy you're going to get, even from those people who ordinarily would have been sympathetic toward your plight.
Yeah,
right.
You're hurting the movement.
Yeah.
You're hurting the
yes,
movement.
yes, mm-hmm. yes. Mm-hmm. And then that's what the labels come in.
Exactly.
And people start dumping everybody. They start referring to people in groups and not as individuals. Well, they did, they did.
Yes.
No, it wasn't all they.
I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, because of the actions of you in the 60s and in the 70s. I don't know that we, as a nation of blacks, will be where we are today. I don't know that we will be as successful. I don't even know that I would be a firefighter in Forest Park. So I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for your sacrifice, your discipline, your dedication. As you said, you were scared. I couldn't imagine.
Neither could I, yeah.
We're downtown and rubber bullets are flying past. I'm like, oh, it's time to leave. It's time to leave.
I thank you, Denise, because you played far. I mean, that situation with you was far more dramatic than anything that I would have experienced. My experiences were basically at home, doing some of what you call grunt work, organize meetings and getting people to come to meetings and helping to register people to vote and those kind of things. But it took all of that for us to move forward. and we have to continue to move forward.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes.
So I want to thank you, Forest Park, for tuning in. I am Jermaine Hill, Assistant Chief of your Forest Park Fire Department. So I want to thank you for coming out and spending time with us tonight. Vice Mayor Holt, Mayor Chuck Johnson, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to interview you. We got to do this again next time.